So if you're not someone who's going to vote from home, you want to vote in person, you have two other options for casting your ballot. And to tell you a little bit more about polling place operations and how that's going to work with drop boxes, I want to welcome Board of Elections Commissioner Jenny Johnson to come to the program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Secretary Gorbea. Happy to be here on behalf of Chairwoman Medeiros and my fellow commissioners. And I first want to recognize the fantastic work of elections officials across our state. Due to the partnership and the effort of the Board of Elections, the staff of the Secretary of State's office, our local boards of canvassers, and the thousands of poll workers, Rhode Island voters, I'm happy to say, were able to cast their votes for the statewide primary safely and securely on Tuesday, and will again as we head into the November election. And speaking of looking ahead, it's important to note that voting safely from home, as Secretary Gorbea said, is just one option that Rhode Islanders will have for the November 3rd general election. And so as we saw in the weeks leading up to Tuesday's primary, in-person emergency voting legislation that was passed over the months thanks to the work of the Secretary of State's office and the Board of Elections will again be available in November. So starting 20 days before the election, voters can go to their city or town hall during business hours and cast their ballot right into a voting machine, just as they would at a polling place. We think that this provides voters with a convenient, safe, and secure process to cast their ballots into a machine prior to actual election day. And importantly for this year, as we find ourselves in an unprecedented time and working through a continued pandemic, it helps spread out the crowding that would otherwise happen at a poll. And as Secretary Gorbea said, we expect high volumes of voters for this election. The second option is voting at a polling place on election day. That will also, again, be an option in November, and there'll be 421 polling places and 40 additional polling places for voters to cast ballots for president and vice president only. All polling places will be set up in accordance with the Department of Health guidelines with hand sanitizers, masks, and PPE. And lastly, as Secretary Gorbea mentioned, voters also have the option to cast their ballots from home, which we found was a very popular option this past election. The board has also purchased 40 secured drop boxes for the cities and towns to be distributed, and those will be open 24/7 up until 8 p.m. on November 3rd. They will be available during the emergency voting period for voters to also drop their ballots into. And I think it's important to note that voters can bring their ballot to any drop box regardless of the city and town. They also can bring them to the polling places on election day. So as you can see, we've worked hard, the Secretary's office has worked hard to make sure that voters can access their right to vote safely and securely as we find ourselves in a really challenging time. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I did not make a pitch for poll workers at the polling place. It was definitely a challenge, but I think people really stepped up. I think we especially saw a fair amount of young people stepping up to work the polls alongside people who have done it for many, many years. And if you do know anyone and would like to work the polls, you can contact your local boards of canvassers or the Board of Elections. So that's all I have. I want to thank you again for your partnership and for asking me to speak today.